Okay, so we now created our table and we put an item into it. And now we want to use API Gateway, create a new API Gateway. You have to search API Gateway in the search bar here, create API and use here REST API. And we're going to use this to retrieve the item from the DynamoDB table. So we give this a name, no description, and leave it to region. And click on Create API. And now you have this default resource here. We're gonna create a new resource and call it users. So it's always a good idea to start with the plural because we're gonna have several users, and then we're gonna specify it further down, create another resource, and call this one ID. So you can imagine it like a folder structure. First you have users, and then you want to get one user of this ID, one user of this users folder, and we're going to retrieve this with a path variable. I don't know why this is created with the dashes. You have to replace it with the brackets, and then go on create resource. So to use this resource, we have to create a method for it, and we're gonna call it, we're gonna make it a get method. And we're not gonna use a lambda function here, we're gonna use a AWS service directly. I'm gonna show you later how to use a lambda function also for this. Region, just use your region. For me it's central, EU central 1, and at the service that we want to call, it's a DynamoDB table. And here don't use get, use post, because DynamoDB under the hood always uses post. So we have to use post. If you use get, this would not work. And here the action is GetItem. I will post in the description where you can find the different actions for the DynamoDB. And here we post in the resource name, which is the resource name of the DynamoDB table that we created. Here leave it to pass through and use default timeout, and now click on save. Okay, we get this error here because I didn't read this correctly, and now while I'm recording, we don't have to put in the resource name of the table, but of a role for the API gateway that allows it to access the DynamoDB table. So for this, first click on policies, create policy, choose a service, and it's going to be a policy to access DynamoDB. And here we only want to give it read access and only for GetItem. So this is the least amount of access we can give, and it's good to not give more than it needs. And here we need the resource name of the table. You can find it here in the overview of your table. Okay, click on add and then review policy, and let's call it API, no, DynamoDB get item 2. I did this before, so I have it already. And now we have to attach this policy to a role. So we also have to create a role, and this one is going to be for the API gateway. We attach the role to the service with the policy which allows it to call another service. Here we're going to filter for policy. Wait, so this one is just a default policy to allow it to log to CloudWatch. Okay, I don't know why we can't choose it here already. We first have to create a role. We create the role. We search for it. And now we can attach the policy. And here we have to choose this one that we just created. You can check out here, it allows only this action to get item. This is exactly what we want. So attach the policy and now get back to the API gateway And okay, we can't choose it from a drop down. We have to copy the ARN that you see after creating the after attaching the policy. Anyway, we paste it in, and now we can click on save. No way. Okay, I don't know why this error still appears. And now we have to map this request even further. We get, wait, I can, here this method request is what goes into the API gateway or comes from the API gateway. And then this one is how it's sent to the DynamoDB table. This one is the service where which is called. It's going to return a response, and here you could map it back and then return the response to the client. So the flow is client, method request, integration request, DynamoDB integration request, method response, then the response goes to the client. And what we have to do is to change the integration request and put in some code. So here in the mapping template, we choose when there are no templates defined, and we add a new mapping template, which is going to be application JSON. Click here, accept, and then we enter our code. What is this code? First of all, the table name of our table, which is not SerializationException, but SerializationTutorialUsers. And then we have to put in the key. And in our case, we don't have a sort key. We only have one key as key. If you remember that when we created the table, we didn't add a composite. We didn't create it with a composite key, so we didn't add a sort key. But if you had put in a sort key, you would need to specify the name of the sort key here, and then the type of the sort key, and put in the parameter here, probably with username instead of ID. But we don't have that, so let's delete this. And what is this? Here, this is the name of our key for the table. Just make sure that it's that's correct. That you have here the correct type S. If you used a number, you would need to put in N, but we used string as type for the ID. Make sure that you have these here and the $sign. Yeah, that it looks exactly like this, and maybe even validate your JSON by posting it into a JSON validator. You can Google JSON validating, because otherwise you can get stuck in this very long. So table name and key is necessary, and then click on save. And now we should be ready to test it. So what was the 01 was the value of our test user. The rest we don't have a query string for our parameter, and we get a 200 response, and we get the name of the item and the liked recipe from Johnny. So it was successful. And now don't forget to deploy this API. You can create a new stage, or you have to. Let's call this one dev. Yeah, great description. And now you get this invocation URL. Invoke it directly from your browser. So just type in users and then 01, and it's going to return this. You can also use Postman for this. So to use Postman, you have to download Postman and install it, and we create a new collection. We call it SyizzleTutorial. Create this, and here we create a add request. This one we're gonna call get user, and it's a get request, and we enter the the URL, and it works. If it didn't work for you, make sure that you also check that this value exists in your DynamoDB table, because it's gonna return status 200 anyway. This is here because of the method response is always 200. We need to change this later. If you get an error here somewhere which says SerializationException, this can mean a lot of things. Most probably has to do with your integration mapping. Make sure that you use here post, that you have GetItem here, that you have your role attached. Maybe also try to give it full DynamoDB access. Yeah, here make sure that you use the right one, and here that you have no typo, and especially this part is difficult to set up. So if you have a complicit key, make sure that this is correct, that here these are put in. So yeah, but for me it worked, and I hope it did for you. Otherwise, leave a comment.